All right, the remnants of the full moon and Mercury retrograde are sitting with me because my platform just gave me a bit of a hiccup here, but here we are. It is Wednesday, August 21st. I'm here with my new friend, Kiki Grace. I think we met only 2 weeks ago. We probably should even talk about how we met because even that was just kind of a funny interaction, but I'm glad we did. I don't like screwing up other people's bios. So I'm going to just ask you to say who you are and what lights your fire, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, who am I and what lights my fire? I like those questions. So I guess professionally, I'm a Somatic Empowerment Coach. What that means to me is that I help people tap into their own sense of power, their own authenticity, their own versions, what lights them up. And in the process of that, letting go of the things that have maybe gotten in their way, unhealthy habits, addictions, nervous system dysregulation, things like that, to just become who they actually want to be in the world, align to what they want, ask for what they want, create the life that they actually want. And the main tools that I do use to help people with that is somatic inquiry. So that comes from the Hakomi or somatic experiencing systems, transformational coaching model, and psychedelic medicines. I've also added in human design recently, but I'm still in training to do that. So I'm not a full reader yet, but I still bring in elements from the human design system because I just find it to be super supportive to helping people align to their authentic self. Yeah. And I also work collaboratively with my partner. And we're moving more into a collaboration where we really specifically work with couples to help couples understand the delicate balance between who am I and who are we. Because so often in relationships, we lose a part of ourselves in relationship to the other. And codependency is a very common form of relationship, which is ultimately emerging of the way we describe it is it's a merging of responsibilities of who's responsible for what in each other's lives. And so we really delineate those and teach people how to stay as two separate beings who know how to ask for support, take responsibility for themselves, not for somebody else, and not weird transfers of responsibility in relationships that happen. And then again, we use all the same tools. He's a somatic sex educator, so he has the whole sex element, which is crucial in relationships. So that we can really help people foster connection. Is at the end of the day, that's the main thing, is how to become true to yourself so you can foster deeper connection with other people.
Interesting. And because I find human design is often not both partners into it, is he interested in it, or you're both using the tool? Or
good question. He's picked it up from me. He doesn't study it to the same degree that I do, but he's found it really fascinating. He was a manifesting generator, and when he found that out, he's been one of those truly multi-passionate people who has all these things all over that there's no real connection between them, that like it just like you look at him and you're like, what the heck? And he would just do these projects and have all these things that light him up. And so when we first got together and I was explaining kind of like human design to him, it was just like, for him, it was like, oh, okay, cool. That makes sense. And I've actually encouraged him, like, because he'd be like, well, maybe if I do this and then that can bring in this element. Like, so he's been a film director, a stay-at-home dad, a kinesiologist, and now he's a somatic sex educator. And at one point he was like, I wonder how I can like make them all like come together and do all these things. And I said, what if you just don't? And they just exist on their own. And they're just aspects of your life. Because we tend to have this thing of like, bring everything together and have this cohesive idea, but that's not always right for everybody, as the human design system kind of explains. So that was really liberating for him to really just see himself in that. Even to the point of like, I've done designs on his three girls, and we've like brought in elements as to like how to help them lean into strengths from their designs a little bit more. They kind of like roll their eyes at it a little bit, but so I just like bring in little bits here and there, just like, hey, this thing is popping up. I want you to just be aware of this, and maybe this might be how it might function really well for you. So that kind of thing. So it is a language in how him and I talk about people, but I wouldn't say he's super knowledgeable in it.
Cool. Yeah, no, I mean, I rarely meet, actually, the only couples that I ever meet that are super into it were super into it first and then found each other after kind of shedding their current partner or just, whatever. I find a lot of human design folks that I'm meeting, if they've been in the expert a long time, they've gone off and just like moved by themselves. Like some just really siloed themselves to kind of rediscover. I mean, that's the one piece of advice I had heard for reflectors, for example, is they don't really know who they are constantly. They just never got a sense, and they're being, influenced by everyone. So the best thing a reflector can do is go like hold themselves up in a house by themselves, like a cabin in the woods, for at least one lunar cycle, just to be like, this is what's going on. Like there's literally nobody else here influencing me, and I'm still being influenced by something, and get a sense of self. So that's cool. Yeah. Lots of places we can go here, but let's start with the medicine thing because I don't get to talk about that on here very often, and it's top of mind for a bunch of reasons. I guess my first question is here's a bunch of questions, and then you can decide. One, what medicines do you use and why, like first scenarios? And then I'd like to know a little bit about your own journey with it, like how it found you or you found it. Yeah, let's start with those two, anyways.
I'll do my own journey first because that'll feed into why I use certain medicines. It'll help make sense. So quick life synopsis of 35 years. I was basically depressed my entire life. That was the cognitive understanding of my existence, felt sense was, and I could identify it when I was like 12, that I remember I was like looking out on like the soccer field and I was just like, I don't feel what those kids feel. I don't have that experience. Something is different happening here. And I tried getting some help when I'm a teenager, but honestly, it's hard, I think, to get the right help when you're a teenager. And that led me to lots of different things. And by the time I was 19, it was basically like, just to be really blunt, go the suicide route or figure out something else. And so I did get into therapy, and I do want to credit therapy for helping some aspects of just some of the story elements that I had created from meaning. But what really drew me is I just ended up having some friends who had mushrooms. I'd grown up pretty decently religious, and a United Church religion, so not like super constrictive, but still religious in a way of like drugs are bad, alcohol's bad, all these. Well, not so much alcohol's bad. Alcohol is in our family, but drugs were definitely bad. Pot was bad. Like I didn't touch any of that in high school. I was like pretty goody two shoes. But I just got to this place where there was like a desperation to just see what else is out there and how to, I think base level at 19 was just like, how can I stop feeling this thing that I feel every single day? And the two things.
That was around 19?
That was around 19.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Up until then, I'd used alcohol as like my main suppressant. But that just wasn't functional anymore. And so I ended up finding both cannabis and mushrooms roughly around the same time. Cannabis became a daily thing. And there's lots of good that cannabis has. That could take us in a whole direction. But so actually, I'll talk about that. So one of the things that cannabis did do for me when I first found it was it slowed everything down. So I felt like, so a lot, I say I was in depression because I was like the main state, but depression and anxiety do fluctuate, and you kind of go between these high excitation states where everything just feels like it's like this, and then like you crash and you come back into nothing, and you're just kind of fluctuating in between the two of those. So that was basically my reality through most of adolescence till I was about late 20s is when I really got a hold of that. Now that's taking a hold that's this big and slowly bringing it into regulation. So cannabis, the first thing that I found, like one of the maybe second or third times that I smoked it and really smoked it and like sat with it with myself, is all of a sudden it just slowed everything down, and I was able to start making sense of what was happening in my own brain. All of the input, all of the things that were happening. And so that was a relief just in and of itself, because all of a sudden, instead of it being 20 strains going all which way, like I have a fairly chaotic brain, it was like, oh, this, I could like follow a path for a longer period of time and understand what was happening there. So that was really helpful. And I ended up using cannabis for about 15 years, almost daily. There was breaks in those 15 years, but it was definitely a support and crutch. And there's reasons for both of those. That could be a whole podcast on in and of itself.
Yeah.
Then I went into mushrooms. And one of the most beautiful experiences in mushrooms, probably the second time I took it, was I actually had the first experience of true joy. I could never remember actually feeling joy, elation, excitement about life, understanding, like, and I remember being like, this is that thing that I saw the kids on the field and was like, I don't feel that. I was like, this is that feeling, like, oh, okay, I get it. And before that, I'd been on like, I even may have been on antidepressants at the time. I'd been put on antidepressants, and they do help in terms of taking the extremes and compressing them. That's my experience. My mood did elevate, but I wouldn't say that I was experiencing life. I wasn't experiencing joy. I wasn't experiencing the vast emotional fluctuations that create a fun life. So then I ended up finding mushrooms, having this experience of joy. And what that did is it pointed me towards a feeling I could work towards. When you're in depression from basically a young child, and I'll explain why that ended up being the case, but and you don't actually have a cognitive or like somatic physical memory of joy or happiness, it's really hard to find it. It's really hard to search for something that you've never experienced or can remember experiencing. So having that, it's like it like reinvigorated the memory of like, this is what life can feel like. Now you can go and find it yourself and go tap into the things that bring you closer to that feeling in life. And that's not to say I never touched mushrooms again. There was definitely lots of recreational practice for a few years. After that, I got into MDMA and all these other things, and definitely a more recreational container. Not that I think that we should condemn recreation. There's still lots of beauty, and I learned a lot through it, but it wasn't quite the same as when I later came into more intentionality and really understanding the depths of what these experiences have to offer. But so that would be like kind of my introduction into it, and what kind of got me moving away from depression and into understanding different ways of navigating how to think about depression and anxiety. Then I ended up really following the path of like, what does it mean to use these with intention for healing? Like that started to become more aware. There was different friends that I started to meet. And I ended up moving into more of an ayahuasca community, where ayahuasca is very, has a deep history of being used for healing, being used for, a plethora of things.
More ceremony.
And it was in, pardon?
More ceremony for sure.
More ceremony. Yeah. More just honoring and really going into not just, I don't want to feel this, I'm going to move out of it and try to create this life over here, but also like, what created this? What have I not looked at? Because as much as I moved away from things, I was still dealing with regular anxiety on a day-to-day basis. I was still trapped in like this nervous system that felt really contracted a lot of the time and unable to fully interact. I was really good at of putting on a face and knowing how to engage with people. Most people never knew I was depressed and all these things. Like I was very good at masking and very good at showing up to a moment of what was expected of me, but even more so than you crash later, because that's layers upon layers upon layers of disconnection from your own authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
So ayahuasca, I was in an ayahuasca community, and I stay in a community, like I was working with medicine like every 2 to 3 months for about 5 years. I was consulting with the leaders very regularly. I was actually contemplating becoming an ayahuasquero. So I was in that idea of studying it, learning the tradition, doing plant diets, really deep in the tradition as much as you can, while also having a job and paying bills and doing all of that. And that really got me to, I mean, what ayahuasca can show you is just phenomenal. All psychedelics, but like ayahuasca just has a very special place. And through Aya, as well as other things that happened, it actually showed me that the root of all of that had stemmed back to sexual trauma I'd experienced as a young child that had been fully suppressed, because our being is very intelligent and knows how to shield us from things that are too painful to look at. But over time with psychedelics, it slowly revealed, and it does take a lot of time, at least for me, because you have to be willing and ready. And there's all these different layers that I had to work through. And so, but I just kept trusting and knowing that there's something there. There's something I'm not aware of. And it was a fascinating experience once I was able to finally see, allow it in, understand the truth of it. And I've worked with other plants since then to help clear a lot of the trauma. And that's a whole other conversation. A layer of anxiety that had been present with me my entire life is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I've been able to make sense of that is like, once we can actually reach in and feel and allow like a truth that our body knows, that our body is holding on to. And by body, I mean nervous system, brain connection, the whole thing. It knows, it's in our cells. Our cells have lived there. Yes, they've changed, they've transformed and all of that, but there is memory of that.
Mm-hmm.
And once it's like, oh, I see you, I hear you, I know that to be true, I believe you, and I'm going to help work through that. It literally was like this layer came down. That didn't mean I had no anxiety. But it was like 20-30% was gone within 2-3 days. After that, and kind of along with that, I started working with, COVID kind of took me out of the ayahuasca community, and there was just this big disconnection. All that got shut down. There weren't groups happening anymore, all that kind of thing. And it was really fascinating to experience. Like, I'd been like, this is what I need to do. And the energy of life just was not allowing me to continue to pursue that. It was really fascinating. There was just this big like stop sign, no, and it was like, no, you've got what you needed. You're good. And not to say that I don't still work with ayahuasca sometimes, but it was like, that's not your path. And it was just like this pivot. And then this guy came into my life who was needing a woman to help hold space for a medicine called Bufo, or 5-MeO-DMT. And the very first time that I had that medicine with Bufo, it literally, I went in and it was like, thanks for following the path this far. This is the medicine you've been meant to serve. And it was just like so clear. And I came out and he was like, yep, you and I are supposed to work together. And I was like, yep, okay, great. And we worked together for about, sorry.
No, I'm just laughing because I've done 5-MeO DMT once, and it's, yeah, I understand what you're saying. So
Yeah. So I then went into, you could say, or what I would call is like a training with him, in terms of how often I was taking it, really understanding the medicine, getting bigger and bigger doses to be able to take more, and to be honest, in a very masculine way of working with the medicine. Go in deeper, more, hit harder, let's like dig it in. And as I was doing that, it was really fascinating because he'd invited in this, like, he had been told he needed to find a woman to work with. And as I was in these like deeper, huge doses, all the messaging I was getting is, it doesn't have to be like this. We can do it softer. We can do it gentler. It doesn't have to be like this. And I was like, this is so fascinating. And I would come out and we would just be having these conversations where like there was just this disconnect, because like I'm supposed to be training from him, but the messages I'm getting in the medicine are like completely contradictory to what he's teaching me. And so eventually we ended up having to fully split, because I was like, I need to go and figure out what it means to be softer and gentler with this medicine. This is not working for me. But I learned how to hold space. And then I met another mentor who taught me how to work with 5-MeO basically in like almost microdoses. So I've really, really diluted, tapered vape pens where you have like, because like even with Bufo or like small doses, people are like, yeah, I do the handshake and the hug and the blast off. And I'm like, yeah, but even the handshake is a big Like there's only so small you can make it when you're going to smoke it in a pipe or something. And so
Mm-hmm.
even a handshake is still a decently big dose. With the way that I was then trained later, and I work with people, like the first pen that people work is a 1 to 12 dilution. So that means it's like 83 milligrams diluted into 1 gram of a solvent. I use PEG 400. Um, and then you control how much you inhale, how long you inhale. So there's all these factors. It's a diluted amount, and you can take a 1 second inhale. What is 1 second of this diluted 5-MeO? Sit with that for 2-3 minutes. You can layer it, and you can work up to a slightly higher pen. And so you get to, in this form of 5-MeO, stay present in your body, allow the releases that are still going to happen, but you're not necessarily blasted out and come back in. Not that there's not a reason to do that sometimes. I'm still a believer of that experience, though minimally.
Mm-hmm.
um, but you get to be in your body and be slightly out of your body simultaneously, and create integration of those in a way that is way more functional for actual moving through trauma and moving through things. And so I started to work with that on my own, to learn the pens on my own, really deepen into that before I started offering that to other people. And then that's truthfully the only way I work with 5-MeO at this moment in time, is in that manner. And it's really beautiful. Like you don't need a massive experience to get profound change.
Mm-hmm.
And you can work yourself up to a bigger experience if you want to, but you can actually teach yourself how to slowly surrender with the smallest amounts, how to let go into the smallest amount, instead of heroic dosing, which is like this big thing with psychedelics. You need big doses of things, and then that'll make you surrender. It's like, did it make you surrender, or did it incapacitate you? Those things are not the same,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep, for sure.
You were forced into surrender, sure. But if you come back, which often happens with people with 5-MeO or Bufo, come back into a supremely activated nervous system, you actually were never in true surrender. Your nervous system wasn't calm and settled and allowing the experience. It was forced into it in a way that then you have to process, was that actually anything you wanted?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that could be its own tangent as well.
That's on the
Um,
topic of it, so for sure, yeah.
Yeah. And so anyway, once I found 5-MeO, that's become one of the main medicines I do work with people when
Mhm.
they're ready. Now, because it is a slow taper, I can work with people who are brand new. That said, if someone comes to me and they are completely brand new to psychedelics, the psychedelic I often will work with them right away is MDMA,
Mhm.
because MDMA or 3-MMC, I've been kind of playing a little bit more with 3-MMC, um, because it doesn't have as much tactile sensation with 3-MMC in a way that can kind of take you out of being with yourself, because you get kind of externally oriented instead of internally oriented. Um, but the reason I really like it is generally in the right context, container, environment with MDMA, you will likely have a good experience. Might you have to face some hard things? Absolutely. And just the nature of MDMA, you're likely going to have a better ability to look at it more objectively, to feel okay as you're being confronted with this hard material. And generally, it's a better first experience for somebody than mushrooms sometimes can be.
Mhm.
Um,
Sure.
I've never had a bad experience on mushrooms. I've had hard experiences, but I've never had one that I came out and was like, I wish I didn't do that.
Mhm.
Um, but people do, because it can be really overwhelming. So if someone does come to me, I often will start them with MDMA. Sometimes I might pair that with psilocybin if they're really wanting a deep, kind of more introspective experience or something a little bit more spiritual. Um, and sometimes I'll actually pair it with a little low dose of 5-MeO as well. Again, if they're needing to move through something a little bit more specific.
Mm.
Um, and then those are the main three medicines that I work with, to kind of come back to your other original question.
Yeah, cool. But I've tried everything there.
Okay.
And everything you're saying resonates for me. I've actually never done ayahuasca,
Okay.
and I felt called at one point, but 5-MeO appeared through my friend, and then I was like, oof, that's enough of that for now. So I'm sure at some point I'll probably return to that. But yeah, I was trying to think of like the difference between 3-MMC and MDMA, and it really is like MDMA is I find is that like super warm. I get sweaty. It's extra lovey. But then the next day, you sort of pay the price. Like my temples are blank, and I'm
Right.
just worn out. And 3-MMC
Right.
seems a bit of a gentler landing, but maybe not quite as much of the like it's not quite as awesome as far as like if you're enjoying the experience versus when it's the hard ones, and it kind of depends on what comes up, I suppose. So
I would say it's not as euphoric.
mm,
So MDMA can have a very euphoric feeling. I mean, there's releasing of oxytocin, of serotonin, of all these mix of neurotransmitters. Whereas with 3-MMC, it's not quite like that. 3-MMC, though, I find to be can be a bit more relational. So in a therapeutic container where we might be wanting to do more like somatic therapy adjunct um, to a psychedelic or a psychedelic adjunct to that, 3-MMC has a more grounding quality to it. I find it's a little bit clearer. And I find, again, my thoughts take on not quite the same as with cannabis, but where I can actually be in like two different trains of thought simultaneously, and I can see how they're interacting with each other. So the
mm,
way that my friend put it, the way it psychedelicizes your thoughts is a very fascinating thing. So I find that can be really helpful in a therapeutic context, where some people with MDMA just kind of get overwhelmed by the experience of MDMA, and then they get a little bit lost in themselves and in what's happening. Now, sometimes I think that can be good, and usually there's like a peak, and then you come back down into more of a clear place where
yeah.
then more of the relational work can happen. And that doesn't really happen with 3-MMC in the same way.
Hmm. I mean, I have 1,000 questions, so I gotta just pick one.
Hey,
Uh,
yeah.
hmm. No, what else do you want to tell me about what you're doing with that work? Or what, maybe even give me something you've seen or experienced that has stood out recently, like, without sharing too many details, but like something profound that someone experienced and the tools you used for them. So no names, just,
Hmm.
like, because you talked about like it's not a cocktail, but you're certainly mixing things based in the moment. You probably have a plan for them. Never mind
Yeah.
your mindset set. I always say mindset instead of setting an intention because people don't know what set means. So it's cute
Right.
that
Mindset. Yeah.
this was mindset. But oh my god, my head's just going every single direction. I told you this morning I had an emotional day, and I'm still just processing that as well. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, like if you can give an example of when fairly recent, if you can, where you went in with a plan and then maybe modified it based on what you were seeing and experiencing. And then I guess the other with that, do you partake a bit with the medicine, or are you clean at that point? Because there's definitely various camps, right? You want to be in the medicine so you're feeling connected, or you're the person's trip sitter and it's important to be responsible. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for a lot of people listening, they're probably not going to know half of what we're talking about. So I will say, like, when you're talking about your
Yeah.
adventure, like you do want a male and a female because of their energy, but also because usually they're alone with that person, and you also want to be safe for them, right? I mean, I think that's and if there's more reasons than that, if you could share that as well. I'm assuming those are the sort of the two primary factors: is the masculine, feminine energy, but also just a woman wouldn't want to be alone with a man and under medicine, and he's not, right? It's a very compromising position. So,
Mm-hmm. Um, so, okay. Yeah, so one of the first things I do always hold containers with my partner. I have done a journey, maybe two journeys alone, only with women. And even in those situations, though they were beautiful and they went well, um, I wished he had been there. More so just because there's more energy that can help contain the space. When you think of a container, um, there's lots of ways that we have to create a container for somebody to be able to actually drop into themselves and into medicine. And one of them is just like the energetic holding of the space. And it's really hard to simultaneously hold the space and be in the space with somebody at the same time. I have done it, but it's like my own energetic capacities and stretched to be able to do both at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So often he will be doing more of the work of just kind of holding the space. His presence is there, it's tuned in, it's keeping, like, I keep doing this with my hands. It's that idea of just like, we're just holding this, but it's not like he's sitting there like this the whole time, but there is just this energetic groundedness. And even to the point of saying, like, sometimes suck in the energy and help ground it. And there is like grounding practices that we do to help displace the energy. And there's other things that you do for that as well. And so, but then coming back to your initial question about like, what was something, okay, so first you said, do I ever change course in the middle? No.
Oh, okay.
I don't.
You got the impression that like you had modified, like you're like, oh, I'm gonna tweak this, but I just misheard. So
No, so not once. So and there's practitioners who differ from this. But this is my firm belief. The plan that we set in going into it, generally speaking, is going to be what we do. They can say no to anything once they are on the substance. So if they decide, actually, I don't want to add, I actually don't want to add more mushrooms, they can say no. But once they're high, if it wasn't pre-decided that we were going to do that, they then can't choose to do that once they're high.
mm-hmm.
Because it can inform another journey. It can inform choices that we make in the future. But for lots of reasons, yes, once you're expanded, you can see things differently. And there might, and a friend of mine who does the same work that I do, we've had a lively debate about this, because he kind of believes, like, are we discounting someone's state of mind when they're in an expanded state? And I was like, I'm not discounting it, but I am saying there's limitations to the decisions it has capacity to make that are true for the person who's going to return the next day and not be in an expanded state.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to honor the fact that there are limitations to that. So I'm one of the things my partner and I do is we have an entire workshop on consent, and how to make agreements and how to form agreements in relationships. It's part of relationship coaching, but every single one of my psychedelic clients actually comes to this as well, because it informs how we make agreements to create the right container for them to deepen into their experience as well. Because if we agree that you don't want your arms to be touched, but you're okay for your legs to be touched, and that's how you've known yourself to be your entire life, and then you're in medicine and you're like, oh, it's okay that my arms are touched, I'm understanding maybe why I might want my arms to be touched. Some people would say, then yes, let's touch your arms. I will encourage them to imagine what that'll feel like and be with that feeling. And when they're sober, because we're always doing integration the next day, let's see what it's like for you in a sober state of mind with this new profound thing for your arms to be touched, not in the expanded state. So that the boundaries that you set before with us, we're going to adhere and show you that it doesn't matter if what happens in that space, we're adhering to what we agreed to from the get-go. And for me personally, because I'd had people do it the other way up and for a long time, where it was like, oh, you want that now? Sure. It seemed the medicine's telling me it's okay. All this stuff is okay. And I kind of went along with it. And then I had him hold space for me, where something in my own experience changed and I wanted a difference than what we had agreed upon. And he's like, hey, I hear you, and we're not going to do that. And having that level of my stated boundaries held for me from somebody whose boundaries had been completely neglected at a really young age, that experience was completely transformative. And it was way more important for that than the fact that I wanted something else.
Mm-hmm.
Because it shows I'm going to hold stable regardless of what is happening for you, to show you, because that's ultimately, if you are a facilitator or a guide, that's your number one thing, is helping hold the stability so that the person can go out and in and have this wild experience and have a groundedness to come back into. So for me personally, that changed my entire perspective, and I will never do it differently. But as I say, you can always say no. No, I don't want more. No, I don't want that. No, because we have to always have the ability to say no.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of something else that I have seen, um, and some of this is like from seeds planted in the work leading up to it. Like I do a lot of prep work with people. But with 5-MeO, because people hear of like this 5-MeO experience where you get to meet God and you go up there and you have this wild experience and all of this stuff. And because I work with it in these really low doses, one of the ways that I talk to people is there also is an experience with 5-MeO where you can just feel like it's enough. You don't need that bigger thing. You don't need something else to be happy. It's enough. And I want you to feel into what it might feel like to allow yourself to not have a preconceived notion of what enough might be, but that you're actually going to feel what it is in the moment. Because, and I'm just going to backtrack, I think a lot of us in our culture have an issue with this idea of enough. Am I enough? Am I doing enough? Am I working hard enough? Should I be doing more? Like just the idea of enough. What there is a general struggle with that in this kind of go production based culture that we live in. And a few times with 5-MeO, but this one in particular, she was a client who was very like she was a doctor. She had been very directly focused in this. I always need to be doing more. So it was really crucial for her. She had done one 5-MeO experience with me where she did try to push it and push it and push it. And she said to me later that she actually wasn't honoring herself. She was telling me she wanted more, but if she was honest with herself, she actually didn't. But she was stuck in that idea of more being better. And so this next time that we came together, and I really encouraged her, like, I'm not going to be the thing necessarily that holds you back, but I want you to really feel into what it might be like for it to be enough. And she actually stayed at the 12-to-1 pen. She had like 3 hits, so not very much medicine. Enough, like you still do feel it. 12-to-1, like 5-MeO is a potent medicine, so you still feel it quite a bit. And I said, "Hey, do you want another more?" And she just kind of giggled, and she was like, "No, it's enough."
Mm.
And she actually had like this experience of, "I get what you mean. Like that was enough, and it can be enough." And then that transformed into, "And I can be enough, and I am enough," and like all of this. And then there is integration after that. That doesn't mean that because she had that epiphany in that moment, that then every day in her life she feels like she's enough. That's kind of a misconception of psychedelics, that you have an epiphany and therefore that's your reality. But it did start to move the needle in this feeling that she needs to strive and do more and all this, and that enough is actually possible to feel and have an experience of. And that was really cool, specifically with this person, to see that happen for her.
Interesting. Do you, with her, were you looking at her design as well? And did you find, because like as you're talking, I'm like, I know how she feels because in my design is that open route. It's a series of gates, and I'm like, I just didn't wonder if even there's correlations there, or is that something everyone's chasing always too? But you mentioned that you use human design to be informed, like give you
Mm-hmm.
basically, to me it's a blueprint of our mechanics, right? And so
Right.
it's where things are amplified. So it's great clues for if the person doesn't know that that's even part of their makeup, and they've been blocking it because others told them you're too much or too extra, or all those things, right? So um, yeah, it's not really a question. I'm more just commenting that I can relate. But yeah, I'm sure the design was probably part of that person because if it's a fairly recent one, that's part of your process. And so were you?
This one wasn't super recent. This was about a year ago, so that wasn't part of the process with this one.
Okay.
So I can't really comment there, but I do try to look at designs. Now, I do have a thing where some people are really not open to it.
Mm.
So I might look at their design briefly, but I'm also, because I'm also trying to stay in consent always with what people are open to and want.
Mhm.
That's a profound value practice principle of mine. If someone doesn't want that in their experience, I need to also guard how much I bring that in, because it still is going to inform them and inform me. And if they really aren't open to it, me doing that is overtaking what they want. Now, a lot of people who come to me are generally open to things, and it's part of the intake process that I have with people. And I tend like energetic medicine. Like, I was trained in Reiki when I was like 21 years old. But honestly, for me, the training was more like, this is what you've been doing your whole life anyway, because it's just an exchange of intentional energy. Ultimately, there's a few other things to it, but it is ultimately an exchange of I'm intentionally moving energy in a way that's going to shift. And I've had some people come to me and be like, well, I'm not open to energy medicine. And that's when that's it for me. I say, then I'm not the right person to work with at all, because I can't actually turn that off. That's not that. So then I'm just not right for you. And I have said that, but human design is one of those ones I don't have to bring in. I have a preference and I think it's beneficial, but that is when if people are just straight up not interested in it, then I'm not going to push them to that. But again, somatics is a non-negotiable for me. So if people aren't interested in like doing somatic based work, I'm not your practitioner. That's the core foundation of the work that I do. So, and I think it's the only way to fundamentally heal. So people who aren't interested in somatics, we're just stuck in the brain at that point, and we're going to lose a lot.
Can you define, because I think I know what somatics is, and I think I've been doing a ton of it myself. But I, like, in my ways, I stumble across something and then I experiment on it, and then I do it for 8 months. I'm like, wow, I've discovered something, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, everyone's been doing it. It's called this. So turns out I was kind of doing it, but I've never actually looked up the word somatic so yeah, if you could just, like, for people that are listening, when you say somatic work, what specifically do you mean by that?
Yeah, great question. So soma literally translates to body. Somatics is like of the body, basically. So it's work that specifically targets the experience that the body is happening. Sorry, that is happening in the body, that the body is going through. And the mind, because the mind is body. So it doesn't differentiate or disconnect the mind, but it doesn't just focus on the mind. So a lot of therapy is talk based. It's often narrative based. There is narrative based psychology or narrative based therapy, but a lot of therapy is talking through the problems, cycling the story, all of this. Sometimes it's, and how do you feel about that? But even that is just, how do you feel about it? Or I'm upset about it. Okay. When we're talking about somatic experiencing, which is a certain type of psychotherapy, or Hakomi, another type of somatic based psychotherapy, it's actually getting the person to focus on what the feeling, sensation, visual, thought, connection, experience is in all of its facets as much as they can in a moment. And there's building up into that. That allows the experience to actually be fully experienced through the body. And in somatic experiencing, it really starts to target the way that the nervous system goes through its cycle of arousal and relaxation, and moving through the different types of the nervous system. So the word somatics I believe it does just translate to of the body. And then there's different tools that people use. Like, there's a Feldenkrais method that has its own way of working somatically. But it's bringing it in through the entire experience of the body. So what sometimes that can look like. Medicines do this a lot. Like, when we think about psychedelic medicine, a lot of times people will start shaking or releasing or twitching or needing to get up and move. And those are all what we would call like somatic based releases, in that they're things that sometimes a person might be having a cognitive awareness of what is being released, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes their mind is clear and their body is just letting things run through them. So those are what we would call more somatic based releases. Outside of medicine, what it can look like is like, I feel a tension in my chest. Okay, can you focus on the tension in your chest? Do you get pulled into the center? Is it okay to be on the outside? And there's reasons to do this. And I'm still training in it, so I don't actually want to go deep into that, because I think I might misspeak a little bit. I'm still in my training.
Yeah.
But there is, it's to have people get more in touch with the physiology, the physical responses of what's happening, and the things that we've been trained from a young age to suppress, like don't flap your arms, don't do that, don't be that expressive. And so we've kind of trained ourselves to be like these kind of robotic people who don't have an expression that's external. And so in sessions with me, sometimes it's like, do you have an impulse right now? Yeah, I want to just like move. Cool. Can we just move? And often, because people get self-conscious, I just do it with them and I'll mirror them, because when someone's joining in, it gives more permission and is freeing. But there is often these impulses of what we want to do with our body, that might be based in a fight, flight, freeze response that is an activation of the nervous system, and it might be all these other things. And sometimes they're soothing. Like people, like often it's like they'll twirl their hair, and sometimes it's just pausing. Hey, can you notice you're twirling your hair? What does that do for you? Oh, it just feels really good. Cool. Can we actually just be aware that that actually feels good for you? Because then there's other times, if you're like freaking out and you don't have the impulse, but you know it feels good, you can use it as a tool for you to start to feel better. So it's bringing awareness to these ways that our body is always trying to self-soothe, always trying to bring us back into a feeling of regulation and safety, and ways that we need to express energy and also kind of regulate energy, all through the body. And from my experience, you can only tell yourself so many stories and work through the mental amount of therapy before you bring it in through the body. And a lot of people can go to therapy for years, never actually touch their body, and their body hasn't actually worked out any of the patterns that are in it. So it's really through somatic based work is, in my honest opinion, the only way to actually achieve full healing integration. I use those words kind of somewhat interchangeably, to let go and become what is ultimately our own authentic expression.
Yeah. Plant medicine eventually took me to an interest in hypnosis,
Yes.
and it's very interesting. Like part of it, I think that took me to it is plant medicine. Like you're giving consent to the plant, and if it's mushrooms, like I'm in this for 4 hours, right? Or if it's LSD, I'm in this for 18 hours. Like it's gonna be a long night. Um, with hypnosis, at least we're gonna count from five, and you're out, right? So there's this idea of consent. Like, you're giving consent to the medicine. With a hypnotist, you need to give consent to the hypnotist because it's terrifying to people. It was to me even in the beginning, right? And I didn't think I was hypnotizable, or at least, but I was just resisting it because I wasn't. I'm gonna fight this. I don't want to go there. Um, wow, I had a question attached to that. Other than it really. Oh, I remember. So that there's consent. You were talking about talking people through things. Um, like whole. I forget the words you use, but I want to get to like tapping or other techniques that you use that once you've kind of gotten to like, oh, good feeling, want to remember that feeling. You want to recall it. That's often what tapping's for, right? Or put your tongue on the tip of your mouth, or you know press your finger together when you kind of reach that state to remember that, like when you were talking about the twirling the hair thing, right? So are there any, do you use tapping? Do you use other techniques at all for that? Or you remind them that, hey, that twirling your hair thing, like when you're stressed, you can recall that as now a useful tool later, where you just didn't even realize you're doing it, but you're creating an association for them so that they can go like, fuck, this is shit. Oh, okay, I'm back in my state, right? I'm safe. Right now, I'm fine. All the anxiety, all the stuff that I'm usually, it's bumming me out. I can get back to that place, right? So, yeah, what do you use? Or is it just you look for the clues like the hair twirl?
My whole kind of orientation is generally what wants to come through the person, what is their instinct, what is their expression, what are their self-soothing techniques that, when given permission, when they can soften, when they can just allow themselves to move into whatever it is, what is unique to them that's going to work for them.
Mhm.
I used to give people more prescriptive, like, try this, try this, try this. Thing is, if it's not native to you, if it's not authentic to you, you're just adding another layer of another mask of another something for somebody to try to do to fix themselves. My whole perspective is, what if you're perfect and you have tools and things at your disposal that you've just actually suppressed or taught yourself weren't okay, that we make okay to be expressions for you, and you then know how to use that, are just instinctually there for you. So you
Mhm.
don't have to retrain yourself. Oh, I need to do this and this and this, and I have this set of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm going to be okay. It's actually, what I need is, I just need to like hold my hair and breathe. And when I think about it, I've actually done that my whole life in
Mhm.
private, but I won't let myself do that when I'm really stressed. And then the only thing that I do teach people is, one of the best resources I think for everyone is a bathroom. If you are out, if you are in any situation and you're just at that little over the top level, go to the bathroom. Figure out, okay, this thing works for me. You're embarrassed to do that in front of your friends? Totally. I get that. Can you find a bathroom and give yourself 5 minutes to just do the things that you know are going to help you?
Yeah,
And
totally.
what they are can be totally different for people. For some people, it is, I just need to put pressure on my chest. Oh my gosh, that feels so good when I do that. For some people, they like hold their hands really tightly. And there's all these unique little situations that when you just slowly take somebody into their expression, connecting to their own being, it naturally arises for them. And then that just becomes their own unique tools. That is not, you should do this, you should do this, or you should do this. Because again, that's adding even more conditioning, for lack of a better word, or more things that they're going to often fight against. And it's not going to feel right for them. Now, does that say that I don't give people some things? No, because I do think learning certain breathwork techniques can be helpful. I know of EFT. I don't know it well. EFT is like the
I can see
emotional
it.
freedom technique, but it is tapping. Um, and so sometimes people will be like, yeah, I've heard of EFT. Should I go learn it? I'm like, if you think that that's where you're drawn to, absolutely
Mhm.
go learn that. But my main thing is like, what is it instinctually in you, or what is coming into your energetic field that is pulling you and pulling your interest?
Mhm.
Um, Learn to follow those impulses versus what someone else is telling you you ought to do, or we think you should do. um, and actually that's the same in medicine. So this is a balance I have with people, because people will often come to me wanting a medicine, and the main one is they want a mushroom journey. Sometimes that's because they don't know of all the other options.
Mhm.
So is it that they want mushroom journey, or is it that they want this and they think mushrooms are going to provide it? So then delineating those two things can be really hard, because
Yeah.
I don't like telling people, or I only start people at MDMA. That's what I tend to encourage people to try first. But if
Mhm.
someone comes to me and they've been researching it and they know they want mushrooms for this reason, they're aware of everything else, I'll start them with mushrooms. They have a very, very clear call towards it. If they kind of come and they're like, I've heard of this and I think it might help me, I just didn't know anything else, we're going to have a bigger conversation and figure out what actually is going to be the right thing for
Mhm. Yeah, so many things there. What I want to comment, so it sounds, just to summarize what you're saying before,
them. Mm-hmm.
your approach is more intuitive about what you're going to do to help them, because you're watching, you're present in the moment, you're observing. So, I mean, I think that's
Mm-hmm.
cool, and I don't think everybody can do that. Um, and then just, like, if you were to talk to them, assess, and you're going to get an intuitive sense of what medicine is right for them. Um, I don't really have a conclusion to that, other than I keep wanting to say, isn't it amazing that 5-MeO, like, you could just put a sign up saying we use that here. Like, it's so powerful, or
Yes.
because it's unscheduled,
Yes.
like, right? So it's a little terrifying when, like, people are all hung up about mushrooms and this and that. But, like, if someone was just like, I heard this 5-MeO thing, I'm gonna have a Big Mac and order of fries, and hit me with a hug of
Oh my
5-MeO.
gosh.
It's like, I know people that have done. Well, 5-MeO is the synthetic version of blah, blah, blah. I can't remember, but I had a friend who she just decided she was like, I'm tough. I'm going to start with that. And she was in the wrong setting and intention. Everything about it. She went with her partner. He went first, he stopped breathing. She witnessed that and then still decided to do hers next. Like a year and a half, her life was disrupted because she just had
Yeah.
no plan, no support, and was stubborn. And it was like, it's just so dangerous. And so, like, it's amazing. What bothers me is just how slow the bodies that are trying to control these things, and a lot of the controls are not for our good either. It's for their benefit. But the ones that are truly powerful and dangerous are the ones they maybe want to say, like, hey, we just want to advise you, like, don't start with 5-MeO, especially without a guide. Like, good gravy. Because it's intense. Um, yeah, I
There's
didn't
a
ask you a question there, but I just
That's
wanted to
okay. That's okay. I can respond
say
anyway. I
that.
do find in the world of 5-MeO, and in psychedelics in general, like psychedelics becoming kind of an industry, but it still is illegal. And there's like the place that psychedelic medicines are in right now is really, really tricky.
Mhm.
And there's, like any profession, there's people who are going to do it really well at a high level and be really mindful of all the different factors that contribute to it. And there's people who are going to be a bit rogue and a bit outlaw and a bit um, personally irresponsible. Um, and particularly with 5-MeO, I find, well, not just 5-MeO. One thing that I really dislike in the space of psychedelics is this rhetoric of just trust the medicine. And while there is wisdom in trust the medicine, that needs to be paired with, are you in a body that can trust yourself yet? Because if you're not yet in a space that has some ability to trust yourself, and you're saying, I'm just going to give it all and trust this medicine, um, and trust this random person who's just like, whatever comes through the medicine is perfect. It's like, yes and no, because, and this is, I find this so hard to articulate because it's, it's both like, yes, in the terms of like, medicines are always going to show us something.
Mhm.
But if that space isn't held well for you and you don't have a nervous system that understands how to work with it and guidance of what to do with it later, it's like giving all the secrets to somebody who can't make sense of them.
Mhm.
Then you're just overwhelmed. And then you're in a nervous system that's overwhelmed and you're thrust back into your life in all this overwhelm. And you trusted the medicine, sure. And what does that mean
Mhm.
at the end of the day?
No integration, right? Like, it ultimately,
No integration.
how do you land the plane that just blasted off? I mean, you just
Yeah.
hear the stories all the time of people being like, I knew I had to quit my job. Well, I was at least instructed when I did my first experience, like, wait a month, like, and
Yeah.
it was impossible for me at the time, but at least waited a few days. And because, yeah, you just come back and you're like, I know what I need to do, but the world isn't ready for new you with your new ideas, and
Mm-hmm.
you haven't even integrated that in yourself yet. So yeah, it is a wacky time, and these medicines have been set back for years because of how they were
Yeah.
controlled and why. So that's it's just a mess. But the fog's lifting, I think, a bit. So
I
that's the
hope
good
so.
news.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
In terms of your friend, out of curiosity, and it is her story, so I want you to be careful in whatever you share. Has she come back to find medicine in a better held container to support her?
Well,
Or has she kind of ex-nated?
she's a former friend, partly because of that
Yeah.
event, but also because there was a number of things leading up to it, and that was the final straw. I'm still friends with her partner, so which is an interesting line to walk. But yeah, I understand she's okay. She's a good
Okay.
person, but is just hasn't dealt with the actual traumas that she's like denying. And you said earlier, like when we talk about even just human design, I was so excited about in the beginning that I was like, "What's your birthday?" And I
Yeah.
scared everyone off of it, and I'm
Yeah.
now trying to go back to like so much so that all of my loved ones are like, "Oh, there he goes again." Doesn't make sense. So I had to like stop, and that's been painful because I've been evolving and learning and growing, and then you start realizing you're kind of it's not like ahead. Although I think in this space where you feel like you're evolving as a human, you're like, oh, I'm ahead, or you get that sort of
Right.
sense, right? And
Hmm.
I don't want to leave anyone behind either. So that one of the things I learned through that whole experience recently is, I can't save anyone. I can only love them. And so even
Yeah.
her, like I was trying to save her. It was none of my business to do it. I didn't. I certainly didn't encourage her to do the 5EMO. I was like, I had done enough things by that point that I was like, I would not be starting there whatsoever. And
Hmm.
I don't think she took it to prove it to me. It was just that she was like always that was her opening line is I'm tough. No one can penetrate me and clearly that's she's very, very fragile and it's just
Hmm.
this exterior, but she just allowed some like the whole thing, it's a terrible story, really. But yeah,
Yeah.
we were unfriends because I was getting texts at 4 in the morning telling me I'm a and she was just texting everybody, telling them who they are and what they do, and apparently she spent like 4 days rocking back and forth in a chair, because of the like she just blew up her world and her
Yeah.
network and everything, right? So I'm open to reconnecting, but I've also learned that certain energies I don't go seek it out. So
Yeah.
it's that energy's done for me, and I'm kind of glad. And I'm not going to be making the first move this time because
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah.
And this is the thing that I think, again, even like as practitioners, as us who hold this space, like I actually get really angry at the person who even allowed that situation to happen as somebody who serves 5-MeO.
Mhm.
Because at a baseline level, like there is a responsibility there for them to be like, no, actually, this is not a beginner medicine, period. Like I do not,
No.
and I'm contemplating finding a little bit of wiggle room here in the right situation, but it's basically a no-go for me for that to be someone's first medicine. I don't care how tough you are. And honestly, the more tough you are, the more I'm like, cool, let's start with something that softens us and gets us to come back to ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, and so like immediately I have just anger towards the person who would hold that space for them, and just sadness because it can like it's psychedelics can be really powerful, but one of the biggest things they do is they magnify our projections. They magnify what we think we believe about the world. And then are we willing to look at that and be humble enough that actually we might be wrong?
Mhm.
And what it's showing us is actually about us, not generally other people. And can we take that in and learn from it and maneuver through it in a way that's going to be as soft and gentle a landing as possible?
Mhm.
And the more that you do it, those landings become harder often. The more often you do it, I should say, when you're doing it a lot, the landings become harder because you are accelerating how much information you're taking, how fast you're growing, da da da. And so if you're trying to grow alongside people, friends, anything, there is a speed in which it's just like other people are just like, whoa, 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 man, that's too much. Like I'm not going to go at that speed, or I'm not there.
Mhm.
Um, so it is like there's all these factors that I don't necessarily know that we talk about with people when they're coming. I mean, I talk about as much of this as I can with people, but um, not everyone does. And there is kind of this just, oh yeah, you're pulled to the medicine. Great, here, let's take it. That's what you need. And it's like that might be what you need, and that might be an orientation, but there also can be a like an intentional path to get you to that thing that you're being called towards, that's mindful and delicate and attuned, right? Just like you said, like you came back and I need to quit my job. Okay, you can hold that you need to quit your job and make the right plan to support yourself in that process. It doesn't mean that you have to come and just okay, I'm quitting tomorrow, I'm done, and then deal with it all. It's like, yeah, we can hold that truth and then find the reins that we need to get ourselves there.
Mhm.
And I think that piece is not always held as in high regard as I would like it to be. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, I had a really good friend get me started, and he
cool.
gave me a couple of suggestions. So certainly, setting an intention and explained what that meant. He called it hold the gold. So you hold the
Cool.
gold, right? It's so simple to remember, thankfully,
Yeah.
because I have a squirrel brain. So I was like, okay, I'm going to hold the gold. And the funny thing is, I came home after my big first weekend, which completely rocked my world, because I never smoked a cigarette. Like I'm talking zero
Right.
to like MDMA and like 7 grams of mushrooms and human design. Like it was one heck of a
Gee.
weekend. And I came home and my wife, of course, wants to know more. And I had told her before, like, I've been advised to hold the gold. So when I come home, I'm sure you're going to want to know how I'm doing. And what I've noticed, anyone that I talk to about the experience, they'll always say, well, what came up about me, right? Because they're also like, how did I fuck up your life, right? Because that's what you're going to
Right.
find out is, and so I come home and my wife's just pressing me for questions and like, no, I need to sit with this for a bit. And she really didn't come up at all during that experience. It was all sorts of other stuff, right? But she kept pressing and kept pressing, and then she was starting to try what I could just see. I could see how her mind worked all of a sudden, in a way, right? And
Yeah.
like that scene in the Matrix where Neo's like eventually sees the Matrix and the guy shoots and all the bullets come and then he's just like no and they just stop and drop. Her words coming at me, the things that used to trigger in that situation, they had become powerless. They were like Nerf bullets bouncing off my chest. And I remember like I didn't laugh out loud, but I was like, holy cow, like that's cool. That's not working. That's not working. But of course that more infuriated her at the time. So
Right.
even that, like talk to your partner. I'm gonna have to hold the gold for a week. It's gonna be nothing personal. I have no idea if it's coming up with you or not, but I need your support as part of that integration
Mhm.
to just let me sit with it and observe and how much of that was true. It might have all been true, but some of it might be like some of the stuff that I got from that first time. If I had just gave it a year, some of those things, and just give it just the attention needed to keep it alive but not kill it yet, would have been way better. But even then, it was still hard to do that. Some things you
Yeah.
just like, I want my new life now. So yeah.
My mentor once, so this is a mentor I currently still work with for all sorts of things, but he is a psychedelic uh, ceremonialist, has been working with plant medicines for like 20, 30 years, maybe not quite 30, but 20 years. Um, he once said something to me, and it rings true so often, is I can see where I'm going. I see that place that I'm growing towards, that I'm getting there. And I don't need to rush it
Hmm.
because there's a process that I need to take to get there. I can see that one day this is a thing I'm going to be doing. And what will it be like for me to enjoy the journey that I take to get there? We're like, I see I want to get there. Okay, I need to do this, and I'm going to get there now. And it's like, and then we rush and we miss all these other things in pursuit of this thing that is likely true and we are oriented towards. But what if we let it evolve and let ourselves evolve in a
Hmm.
way that brings it in at the right time? Because
Yeah.
sometimes when we rush something, all it does is actually create more resistance towards the thing because it's just not the right freaking time.
Hmm.
It's like, and this, like, if we want to get into energetics and the cosmos and all this stuff, there is sometimes, like, I believe, like a rightful time for things to come in.
Hmm. Totally.
And that's a hard concept to fully let go and grasp it and be into, because you still need to put one step forward and take direction in your life and be intentional. But we live in a culture that rushes so much. And I think that often we do that with our own healing, integration, our desire to be different and have that thing now, that we miss so much along the way.
Hmm. While you were saying that, this person that you were mentioning sounds like me again because I recognize certain patterns, and it made me think about human design for a second. So my motivation is desire, and desire is like
Mm,
I want the end results. So I forget to enjoy the journey along the way. Like happiness is actually
right,
like should be right now,
right.
and but not everyone's wired that way. So I'm not sure. I know I'm going to help people move energy. My personal title I'm giving myself is energy strategist because I just that seems to fit for me. Um, I'm not sure I'm going to get into the plant medicine like space as far as holding space for people. I think that's just more
Yeah,
like refer to people like you, for example. Um, but yeah, those little clues too of just being like, okay, this person, this is their motivation type, and it'll be different. Like there's different types and just help and guide them through that. So this tool is so fascinating that I can't help talking about it as well. So
yeah,
do
yeah.
you want to shift a bit to design a bit? Like,
Totally. Yep.
I'm always curious, like when did your experiment start? And and
Right.
so many times the story is either like it was this date, like for me, it was that weekend. Like I didn't see it somewhere else. I know
Mhm.
people that have said I was stuck in asking for answers and I was in the library and a human design book fell out of the bookshelf and landed on the floor. Like that was their moment.
Wow.
And then others are like,
Wow.
my sister introduced me 10 years ago. I thought she was nuts. But there was something she said. And, 10 years later, it was back, right? Like everyone's story is different. But when that hook is in you, and then it's just how far down that rabbit hole do you want to go? So, how did you, and also,
Yeah.
a number of people that have told me that in their ayahuasca experience, they were told, go find human design. Like literally
That's
that was
cool.
the voice given to them. And part of me is like, is that your subconscious speaking because you heard it in passing somewhere else and you mentally earmarked it and in the medicine that premise returned? Or so anyways, I'm basically telling all the different ways I've heard, but
Yeah.
what's your experiment started when and how?
Yeah. So, that I can remember it started. So it may have been one of those things. Actually, the very first time I heard about it was in an ayahuasca. I was at a dieta, so we were doing ingesting a plant that's not necessarily psychoactive, but you work with the plant for spiritual healing, energetic purposes, all sorts of things.
Is that bufo?
Um,
Like, was it getting because bufo is for getting rid of toxins? Isn't it? You mentioned you work with bufo.
Bufo comes from the frog. So bufo has 5-MeO as well as bufotenin in it. So that's not necessarily getting rid of toxins. Combo might be what you're thinking of.
Well, so the woman I'm thinking of, they did Cabo and then Bufo and weekend, and it
Oh,
was
wow.
thunder. So I just got to finish that story a bit. So she
Yeah.
gets there. It's in Mexico because they live in Mexico,
Yeah.
and she's frugal. So she found the cheapest place that offered the service, not the
Right.
best place, right?
Right.
She, I don't mean to tell her story, but you don't know who she is. Nobody knows. So, but I guess there was a man that was sitting in ceremony with them that was like 6'8" and very intimidating. So she, the setting wasn't right. And then apparently it started thundering and lightning, and all the staff ran into the kitchen and took all the knives out of the drawers in front of everybody. And so that they went into medicine having just seen that and wondering like, why would you do that? Like just everything about the situation was so awful. How could that not be the result as you go into this powerful experience? And that's what you're seeing and hearing. They
That's right.
obviously didn't get any part of setting or intention. Like it just
No.
and they do it as a service. They charge thousands of dollars for that. So irresponsible. So I
Right.
already forgot my question was, but I had to just say that. It's over.
That's okay. No, that's okay. So yeah, a dieta that might take us in a different direction. Anyway, um it's an intentional relationship you cultivate with a plant. That's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have psychoactive properties, but you can learn from being in spiritual, energetic, physical relationship with different plants. Now you can do this in and outside the context of ayahuasca. So like this was a 10-day sit. You're taking your plant every day and then you only take ayahuasca like every 2 or 3 days. Um, Anyway, so that was the setting. And at the end of it, a guy looked at me and he was like, "Are you a reflector?" And I was just like, and I had no idea what he was talking about. But at the time, because he turned to my now ex-partner, and he was like, "You're for sure a generator." He's like, "I'm pretty sure you're a manifester." And he just like pointed at all these people and he's like, "And you're either a reflector or a projector. I can't quite figure it out because there's lots of qualities about you that make you a reflector." And then like I started saying something and I was like, "Yeah, maybe I'm a reflector. I don't have a clue what you're talking about." Something I said, and he just looked at me and he started laughing. He's like, "No, no, no, never mind. You're a projector." And I was like, "Okay." So that was actually the first time it was ever introduced to me, but I didn't pick it up at that time.
Yeah, and he didn't explain
But
why. He just kind of created
he
interest.
didn't. I think he did tell me, "Oh, it's human design or whatever," and I was just like, "Okay, whatever." Um, but to be honest, he was a person who um, was speaking pretty wildly about a lot of esoteric kind of concepts, and so I had a little bit of a guard against him
Mhm.
compared to other people who I might have been more drawn to them being the first person to share it with me.
Yeah.
Um, and so, but that was technically my first introduction to the concept. But then it was in 2020 at home in COVID, scrolling information, trying to find, I was pretty lost at the time, trying to figure out where I really wanted to deepen into. Because I'd been following the ayahuasca path, there was like big blocks that it wasn't letting me do that anymore. And I was like, "Hey, what the heck? Like, where am I supposed to go?" And I can't remember how I found it, but I got connected to this like webinar with a woman named Erin Claire Jones, who I adore. I really like how she speaks about and talks about human design. Um, and yeah, it was just like she at the time was doing like these monthly workshops, webinars, whatever, where people would call in and it was just like on Zoom. It was so casual. Um, she didn't leave too much space for questions because she just got through her stuff, but she would kind of like put in here, look up your design, put in what you are in the chat. Let's see who's here. There was like a little bit of engagement. And I think I went to two back to back. The first one is just with like what your type. Oh no, I think the first one would have been type and authority.
Yeah.
Because that makes sense. You would do them both together. Um, and then I think the next one I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And I ended up just going to them like every month for like 6 months because they were just free. In each one, she was going through like a different aspect of the first parts of the human design. I don't think in her free one she got into like arrows and all that kind of thing, but she
Yep.
did do the main kind of the parts that you would get somebody to start with. And so in that one, I looked up and I was a projector with self-projected authority. And when she got to explaining that, the projector piece rang true, but it was when she was explaining the authority and the way in which you need to make decisions. And she said, for people with self-projected, you're somebody who you need to talk things out. You need to hear yourself, have it come out of you and hear your own truth be spoken. And as you speak it, you will feel it as being true for you and true in reality and all these things. And like just whatever, I can't remember the exact words she said, but I just started bawling
Mhm.
because my entire life growing up, despite being this person who was like socially anxious and depressed and kind of like contracted in a lot of ways, my mask was like powerful, energetic, and I just talked all the time. And some of my talking was because I was so um, anxious that it was like a way of dealing with some of the anxiety. Um, but when she said that, I just started crying because the way that she presented it too is these are ways that you can start to see how maybe you've been trying to move against something that is actually a way that you've been designed to be your entire life. And what would it mean for you to lean into that and learn how to work with it in a way that's a service to you and not something that you're pushing against, paraphrasing what she was saying, but that's basically the gist of what she was saying. And I was literally like crying watching this thing because I was like, I have tried so hard to stop talking and to stop being so loud and to stop and to try to gain control of like needing to do this when I'm like trying to work out something, I literally I'm like, but I just need to talk it out, and I need to like have somebody hear it. And they just, and people would like interject. And I was like, no, stop. I don't need you to say anything. I just need to hear it. And growing up, like, that's really annoying. Being like 12 or 13.
Sorry, my alarm reminder just went off. We have to wrap in about 4 minutes here, but that just scared
Yeah,
the
that's okay.
Sorry, what were you just saying at the last second?
No, that's okay. But, and so I can imagine, like, when I was a teenager, it would be annoying because, like, also all this information is coming in all the time. I'm like super receptive in arrows, like in the way my mind works is very receptive. So I'm taking in all this stuff. And in order to make sense of it, I have to talk it out. So as a teenager, I was just like, blah, 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 blah. So I'm trying to make sense of all this stuff coming in. And so when she said this, it was just like this, oh my God, I don't need to fight against this anymore. I need to learn how to harness it, but it's actually a gift, not a curse. And it was just like, it was like one of those moments that I just changed the whole way that I engaged with that part of me. And then spent about 1.5 years learning how to really, okay, what does it mean to talk it out? How do I ask for it consensually with my partner so that they know that that's the process I'm in? How do I work with this in a way that's going to be functional for me, but not overtake the experience of somebody else? Because it can be really draining for somebody else who isn't really available or has the capacity to do that. But it just sent me on this whole process of learning that. And then I dove into the rest of the system and got overwhelmed with trying to understand it all. And I'm in a course now that I have to slowly take in pieces and then take a step back, let those migrate and understand in my being. It's just so vast and deep. But that was my intro. And it just, since then, I've just always like looked at people's charts and people are like, okay, that's cool. And they don't seem to have that same like profound experience that I had. Some people do. Some people are like, wow, thank you. That was really helpful. But for me, it was just an immediate, oh, thank you. Like permission giving is the word that I would say, such permission giving to this core part of me.
Well, and like one thing I find is projectors like to be noticed, right, or recognized.
Yeah, we like to be seen. Yeah.
So if you're roughly 20% of the population, and then of that, you still have a subtype of self-projected. So that puts you in like, only 8% of people would be able to relate to even just that part of you, right? Yeah. Well, my sister-in-law is a self-projected projector, and
cool.
I had heard that before. Like, if you don't hear yourself saying things, you don't believe it yet. And I said that to her, and she's in her late 50s. And from what I've recognized from a lot of people is that the older you are, you kind of become your design anyways, because as you get older, you're like, fuck it, nothing's working. Just seems to keep happening. This is who I am, right? It kind of happens that way. Well, when I started telling her about that, she's like, oh, that's why I'm always using my voice recorder on my phone. She will, if she's got an uncomfortable conversation she needs to have with someone, she will say it, play it back. Doesn't sound right. Play it, or say it again, play it back, and she'll refine it. And like by version 3, she feels good about it. She knows that she can rely on when she needs to have that moment that it's done, right? So then, having had that conversation with her, I was with my friend Elena, and I was talking to her daughter, and her daughter is a self-projected projector as well, with no definition in her throat whatsoever, like no gates, nothing. So I started talking about this, and her mom was like, yeah, like whenever you're in a situation where you need to express yourself and you're not ready, her throat would literally close and she wouldn't be able to speak, right? It was that physical of a reaction, right? And I was like, so then I was telling her about my sister-in-law, and you could just see the light bulbs going off, like, oh, that is what it is. I've experienced that. Like in her mind, she obviously had triangulated in her own life where she had done that, but like such a simple tool is just voice memo on your iPhone and be like, blah, 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 play it back. Okay, blah, blah, blah. And then once it's done, I've taught before, like technology and stuff, and I realized that I never really know it until I teach it, right? I just hear myself going, oh yeah, I do get it. Now, I'm not a self-projected projector, but I still saw how valuable that was for my learning, right? It was probably the most powerful part of it was not reading about it. It was like, okay, now I got to go put this to practice. So cool. Well, once I go change my shorts and stuff, I've got another meeting, but we got to wrap here. It was fantastic talking with you. So, and I'll do that again. We'll just stay in touch. I got to introduce you, or at least point you at this fellow Tony I met the other day. The one thing I want to because you said something about, you talked about how you bring people on. He works only with psilocybin, with mushrooms, because he just loves it and he builds these beautiful products. But I guess he does some integration work with people, and he'll get them to microdose for like 2 months before they're allowed to do their sitting, right? So they're building slowly to it, and then you hit them with a punch. I mean, it's more time, and a lot of people. I mean, you hear people all the time. Like I went to Rhythmia or whatever, and I'm or somewhere, and Rhythmia seems to be doing good work there. But so not casting shade there, but just like you just go and like I've got $5,000, and I just want to. I'm a busy executive, and I just want to. That's the real sad stories where they come back and their whole lives. I thought I was just going to get better at my job, and now I'm gonna go. I'm gonna change my career entirely, and everything's disrupted. So I was trying to say thank you and goodbye, and then I rambled again. So
that's okay.
hang on here for just 1 sec. I'm gonna do my fancy thing where I basically pretend that I'm all polished, and I'll hit.
Thank you for having me on here, by the way, though. Thank you.
Yeah. No,
this was nice.
Okay. I'll in the description, people will know how to reach you there. I've had it in a little footer there at the bottom, and hang on. But for everybody else, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.